This is the story of the scariest night I've ever lived through. I still get chills just thinking about it. I'm going to tell you what happened inside an old mansion. Something so creepy, so real, I swear on my life, I didn't make any of it up. It all started when my cousin Rahul called me up one weekend. He sounded excited. He had been hired by a property company to photograph an old British-era mansion deep in the hills. The place had been abandoned for years, but the owners were thinking of turning it into a hotel. Rahul's job was to capture the beauty of the place for their portfolio. He asked me to come with him for the weekend trip. I had nothing better to do, and honestly, it sounded fun. I love old places. I love mystery. But I didn't know I was walking into a nightmare. We reached the mansion late in the afternoon. It was a long drive up the winding hill roads. The place stood like a giant shadow among the trees, gray, silent, and ancient. The air around it felt heavy. The mansion had huge wooden doors, cracked windows, vines creeping up the walls, and the smell. It was musty, like something had been rotting there for a long time. But Rahul was excited, snapping photos already, and I just laughed nervously, brushing off the weird feeling. We had brought some snacks, water, torches, and our sleeping bags. There was no electricity in the mansion, but we didn't care. Rahul wanted to do a few night shots too. He said the place would look hauntingly beautiful under torchlight. I just wanted to get it done and leave before it got too dark. The inside of the mansion was worse than outside. The floor creaked with every step, and dust hung in the air like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Some furniture was still there. Old chairs, a broken piano, a dusty chandelier. The walls were stained and strange black marks were everywhere. The main hall had a staircase that led to the upper floor, and to the right was a long corridor of rooms. We chose one room near the hall to keep our stuff. As night fell, things got strange. First, we heard footsteps upstairs. Clear, heavy footsteps. But we were the only two people in the house. I thought maybe a monkey had gotten in. But Rahul's face went pale. We looked at each other, then at the ceiling. The footsteps stopped. Then, slowly, they started again. But this time, they were coming down the stairs. We froze. I grabbed the torch and pointed it toward the hall. No one was there. But we both heard it. Thump, thump, thump. One step at a time. Coming down slowly, as if someone knew we were listening. Then they stopped. Rahul whispered, "Did you see anything?" I shook my head, but my heart was racing. I had goosebumps all over. "Let's get out of here," I said, but Rahul wanted to check. Maybe someone followed us, or maybe there's a caretaker. We crept into the hall, flashlights shaking in our hands. The staircase was empty, but right then, just as we reached the bottom step, we heard a loud bang behind us. We turned around. The door to the corridor had slammed shut on its own, hard. The sound echoed through the mansion. That was the moment I knew something was wrong with this place. Still, Rahul, trying to act brave, walked over and opened the door again. It wasn't windy. There was no explanation for it. "Old wood," he mumbled. Maybe it just moved. But I saw something he didn't. On the floor, near the door, there were footprints, not ours. Smaller, bare feet, dusty. As if someone or something had just been standing there. That's when I wanted to leave. I told Rahul I was done. We should go back to the car and sleep there. But as we walked back into the room to get our things, we saw something that made my blood turn to ice. Our sleeping bags were laid out. But now, they were not empty. One of them looked like someone was inside it. just lying there, still. I whispered, "Did you lay it out like that?" "No," he said, eyes wide. "I didn't even open them yet. The bag was zipped all the way up. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to go near it." Rahul, though, in his curiosity or fear, walked forward and slowly unzipped it. Nothing. It was empty. But it had definitely looked full just seconds ago. I swear something had been in there. We grabbed our stuff and ran out of that room. We didn't care anymore about photos or gear. We ran to the front door. It was locked. I don't mean it was just closed. It was locked with a thick chain from the inside. We hadn't locked it. We didn't even bring a chain. But there it was, wrapped around the handles like someone didn't want us to leave. We were trapped inside. Rahul began to panic. He kept checking his phone, but there was no signal. I tried to break the lock, but it was too strong. We thought of breaking a window, but all of them were too high or had thick wooden shutters nailed shut. Then the piano in the main hall started playing. Slow, single notes, like a child learning to play. No rhythm, no pattern, just notes. We turned around. No one was there, but the keys were pressing themselves down, one after another. I screamed. I'll admit it, I lost it. Rahul just stood frozen. Then, out of nowhere, all the lights in the hall, those old candle chandeliers, flickered to life. There was no electricity, remember? But the candles burned anyway. Every single one. And in that glow, we saw her. At the top of the stairs. A woman. In a black gown. Hair covering her face. Just standing there. Watching us. We didn't move. We couldn't. She slowly lifted her head, and though I couldn't see her eyes clearly, I felt her looking straight at me. Then she whispered, soft but clear, "Why did you come back?" We didn't answer. We couldn't breathe. She stepped forward, one step, then another. We turned and ran, not knowing where to go, just trying to find a corner, a window, anything. We ran through the corridor, into one of the side rooms, and slammed. The door shut. We blocked it with a chair. That's where we stayed till morning. The entire night we heard her walking outside, whispering, crying sometimes, knocking on the door. But she never came in. When sunlight finally touched the windows, everything stopped. We stepped out expecting chaos, but the mansion was quiet. The chain on the door was gone. The front door stood wide open. We didn't wait. We ran out, jumped into the car, and drove like our lives depended on it. Later, we found out the story behind that place. It used to be a boarding school for girls in the 1800s. One night there was a fire. Many of the girls were trapped inside. One of the teachers locked the doors to stop the fire from spreading. Not realizing the children were still in their rooms, they all died. Some say the teacher lost her mind and stayed in the house for years, hearing their screams. Others say she died with them, still trying to protect them. Whatever the truth is, we saw her, we heard her, and I will never go near that mansion again. This is the story of something that happened to my friend Emily. I'm telling you this exactly as she told me, because I believe her. And by the end of this, I think you'll believe her too. It's about a mansion deep in the countryside of England, where she stayed for one weekend. Just one weekend, and it changed her life forever. Emily was a travel writer. She loved visiting old places and writing articles about them. Castles, forests, ghost towns, you name it. So when she got an invite to spend 2 nights in Blackridge, Mansion, she said yes immediately. The mansion had just been bought by a private owner who wanted to restore it and turn it into a luxury retreat. Until then, it had been empty for nearly 50 years. She arrived on a rainy Friday evening. The mansion stood on top of a lonely hill, surrounded by thick forest. There were no other houses nearby. The long driveway was overgrown, and the iron gates creaked when they opened. She was dropped off by a local taxi, and the driver didn't even wait for her to reach the door. He sped off as soon as her foot touched the gravel. Inside, the mansion was dark, cold, and silent. The owner wasn't there, but he had left the keys for her, along with a short note. Feel free to explore. Room is upstairs on the left. Don't worry about the creaks. This house is old. The moment she stepped inside, she felt watched. That's the word she used. Watched. The way you feel when someone's standing just behind you, breathing lightly, but when you turn, there's no one there. Still, Emily was used to old places. She told herself it was just her imagination. She lit the fireplace in the drawing room, made some tea, and started looking around. Most of the furniture was covered in white sheets, and the paintings on the walls were faded. But everything had a strange charm to it until she went upstairs. That's when things started to feel wrong. The air on the second floor was heavy. She said it felt like walking into water, thick and slow. She found her room and set her bag down. It was a beautiful, old room with a canopy bed and large windows. Outside, the rain poured heavily. She spent the rest of the evening writing. Around 10 p.m., she decided to explore a bit more. She was curious about a locked room she had passed earlier. She tried the handle again. Still locked. But as she turned to leave, she heard a soft voice from behind the door. It was singing, a woman's voice, gentle, almost like a lullaby. She froze. "Hello?" she called out. No answer. The singing stopped immediately. She leaned closer. "Is someone in there?" Nothing. Now, she was sure someone else was in the mansion. Maybe a caretaker, but she had been told the place was empty except for her. Back in her room, she locked the door and tried to sleep, but around 2 a.m. she woke up suddenly. The fire had gone out. The room was ice cold, and something was wrong with the mirror. There was writing on it, not written with a pen. It looked like it had been written with a finger, in the fog that wasn't even there. It said, "Stay in your room." Emily sat up, heart pounding. She got out of bed slowly, walked to the mirror, and touched the glass. Nothing came off. It was dry. No steam. No moisture. But the writing was there, clear and cold. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, she convinced herself it had to be a prank. Maybe the owner was messing with her. She texted him, asking if anyone else was staying in the mansion. Hours passed, no reply. That afternoon, she explored the library downstairs. Most of the books were dusty and old, but one book was sitting out on the table. A black leather-bound journal. It didn't have a title, just a name inside the front cover. Isabella Blackridge, 1876. Emily opened it and started reading. It was a diary. Isabella had lived in the mansion long ago. Her entries started normal, talking about gardens, guests, weather, but slowly they grew darker. One entry said, "Mother has locked me in again. She says I mustn't sing after dark. She says it calls them, but I can't help it. It's the only thing that makes me feel alive." Another read. "They came last night. I heard them whispering in the walls. I begged Mother to let me out, but she wouldn't. She said it's my punishment. Then came the final entry. I sang again. I had to. Now I hear footsteps outside my door. They don't belong to anyone I know. I think they're waiting. I'm scared. I don't think I'll ever leave this room again. That entry was dated the same day Isabella disappeared. According to town records, a young woman had vanished from the mansion over a century ago. No one ever found her. Emily was shaking. She suddenly remembered the locked room upstairs, the singing, the warning on her mirror. She ran to the front door. It wouldn't open, not jammed, just wouldn't move, like it was sealed shut. She tried the windows, all locked from the inside, no tools nearby. Then the lights started flickering, room by room, like someone was walking through the house. She heard footsteps on the second floor. Slow, heavy, not boots, not bare feet. Something in between. She grabbed her bag and flashlight and locked herself in the drawing room. That's where she stayed for hours. She heard scratching at the door. Not loud, just slow, careful scratching. And a soft voice, singing. Again. This time, the song was different. Not a lullaby. It sounded like a warning. She didn't sleep that night either, just waited for morning. At first light, the door opened on its own, just swung open. Emily didn't wait. She ran down the driveway, barefoot, soaked in sweat, and flagged down a passing van. The owner of the mansion finally replied to her that afternoon. His message just said, "So sorry, was in a no-signal area. There's definitely no one else staying there. Also, please don't enter the west hallway upstairs. That room is permanently locked. Bad history." Emily never replied, and she never went back. She moved out of the country 6 months later, stopped writing travel articles, started painting instead, mostly quiet forests. But sometimes, she paints a room, a large room, with a canopy bed, cold glass windows, and a mirror that always says, "Stay in your room." Believe me or not, but that's exactly how she told it. And when she looked me in the eye, I saw it. She wasn't making it up. Would you ever stay in a mansion like that? This is the story of a man named Tom, a man who thought he understood everything. He was a rational person, no room for superstition, no belief in the supernatural, just facts, logic, and clear explanations. He wasn't the type to fall for ghost stories or urban legends. He had heard them all before, of course, but they were always just that. Stories. Nothing more. Tom had worked as an architect for years, traveling across the country to design new homes, businesses, and schools. His job took him to many places, and he had seen plenty of odd things, but nothing that couldn't be explained. So when he was assigned to design a new building in a remote part of the countryside, a place he had never heard of called Greendale, he didn't think twice about it. It was just another job. The drive to Greendale was long, and the roads were narrow and winding. Tom didn't mind the solitude. It gave him time to think. But as he approached the small town, something about it unsettled him. The air felt heavy, the building seemed old and decayed, and the sky was overcast in a way that made everything look gray and lifeless. There was a small inn at the edge of town where he planned to stay for the night. He had to meet with a client the next morning, and the innkeeper had promised him a room with a good view of the area where the new building would be built. When Tom entered the inn, he was greeted by an older woman behind the desk. Her face was lined with age, but her smile was kind. "Welcome to Greendale," she said. her voice soft and calm. "You must be Tom, the architect. We've been expecting you." Tom nodded. "I'm here to look at the site and finalize some
details for the new project. I'll be staying for one night. Well, we have a nice room for you."
"Quiet, just as you like it," the woman said, handing him a brass key. The room was on the second floor, and as Tom made his way up the stairs, he couldn't help but notice the creaking of the floorboards. The whole inn had an old, worn-out feel to it, like it hadn't seen much attention in years. But the bed looked comfortable, and the window offered a view of the vast, empty landscape outside. Tom set his things down and decided to take a walk around the town before dinner. The streets were deserted, and the houses looked as though they had been abandoned for decades. There were no shops, no people, just silence. It was as though time had stopped in Greendale, and Tom couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong there. As the sun began to set, Tom returned to the inn and ate a quiet meal alone in the dining area. The food was simple but good. Afterward, he decided to retire early, planning to get up at dawn to visit the construction site. That's when things started to get strange. Around midnight, Tom was woken by a soft knocking at his door. At first, he thought it was just the wind or perhaps a mistake, but then it came again, a soft, insistent knock. Tom sat up in bed, confused. Who could be knocking at this hour? He got up and opened the door, but no one was there. He stepped into the hallway, looking left and right. The hallway was dark and empty. The only sound was the faint hum of the inn's old pipes. "Is anyone there?" he called out, but there was no answer. Shrugging it off as a trick of the mind, Tom returned to his room and locked the door behind him. He lay back down in bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Every few minutes, he would hear soft footsteps outside his door, pacing back and forth. Just the old building settling. He told himself, trying to convince himself that nothing was wrong. But then the temperature in the room dropped. Tom could see his breath in the air, even though the heater was running. He pulled the blanket tighter around himself and closed his eyes, hoping to fall asleep. But the knocking started again, this time louder, more urgent. With a sense of dread creeping into his chest, Tom threw back the covers and rushed to the door. He flung it open, but once again, no one was there. The hallway was as still as before. But something was different. There at the far end of the hallway, standing in front of a large, ornate mirror, was a figure. Tom's heart stopped. The figure was a woman, tall and thin, wearing a long, dark dress. Her face was obscured, her back turned to him. "Excuse me?" Tom called out, his voice shaky. "Are you okay?" The woman didn't move. She just stood there staring into the mirror. Tom took a step forward, but something made him pause. The woman's reflection in the mirror didn't move with her. It stayed frozen, as though it was trapped in time. And then, slowly, the reflection turned to face Tom. He froze. The face in the mirror wasn't a reflection. It was something else, something darker. The woman's eyes were wide and empty, and her mouth twisted into a grin that sent a chill down his spine. The air around him grew cold, and he felt an overwhelming sense of terror wash over him. Without thinking, Tom turned and ran back to his room, slamming the door behind him. His heart pounded in his chest as he sank to the floor, gasping for breath. What had he just seen? Was it a trick of the light? Was he imagining things? He didn't know, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something in the inn was very, very wrong. The next morning, Tom left the inn before the sun had fully risen. He didn't want to stick around to find out what else might be lurking in that place. As he made his way to the construction site, he couldn't help but glance back at the inn, still standing in the distance, its dark windows staring back at him like hollow eyes. The project went smoothly for the next few days, but Tom couldn't forget what he had seen. The woman in the mirror, the empty eyes. He asked around town about the inn, hoping to find some kind of explanation. What he learned sent a chill down his spine. Years ago, a woman named Eleanor had lived in that very inn. She had been a guest, just like Tom, but unlike him, she never left. She had disappeared one night, vanishing without a trace. Some people said she had gone mad, others said she had been taken by something sinister, but no one knew for sure. All they knew was that after her disappearance, strange things started happening in the inn. Guests reported hearing footsteps, feeling cold drafts, and seeing a woman in the hallway staring into the mirror. And then, just as quickly as the sightings began, they stopped. But Tom knew one thing for certain. The woman in the mirror wasn't just a ghost. She was a warning. He never went back to Greendale. And to this day, when he passes by an old inn, he can't help but wonder what's hidden behind its walls, and whether some secrets are best left undisturbed. This is the story of Jack, a man who never believed in things that go bump in the night. He was a businessman, an executive at a well-known company. His life was all about deals, deadlines, and decisions. He wasn't the type to go looking for adventure or excitement. He preferred routine, things that were predictable, controlled. But one night, after a business trip, Jack found himself in a place where nothing seemed normal, and everything he thought he knew about the world was questioned. It all started with an unexpected delay. Jack had been attending a conference in a small town called Eddington, a quiet place with old buildings and winding streets. His flight was canceled due to a storm, and the next available flight wasn't until the morning. The town didn't offer much for entertainment, so Jack decided to spend the night at a local bed and breakfast called Harrow House. Harrow House was an old, charming building with ivy crawling up its stone walls and a large wooden door that seemed to creak when it opened. Jack wasn't sure about the place at first, but it was the only option. The innkeeper, an elderly woman named Mrs. Wilkins, welcomed him with a warm smile and showed him to his room on the second floor. The room was cozy enough, with a fireplace, a large bed, and windows that overlooked the quiet town. It seemed like the perfect place to relax for the night. The moment Jack sat down in the armchair by the fire, he noticed something strange. There was a painting hanging on the wall, an old portrait of a woman. Her eyes, dark and intense, seemed to follow him wherever he went in the room. Jack thought it was just a trick of the light, but it was unsettling. The more he looked at her, the more he felt an odd sense of being watched. Trying to shake off the unease, Jack decided to take a walk around the inn before heading to bed. He wandered through the dimly lit hallways, admiring the antique furniture and old family photos on the walls. As he passed one of the rooms, he thought he heard soft voices coming from inside. Curious, he knocked lightly on the door, but no one answered. When he tried the handle, it was locked. Shrugging it off, he returned to his room, but the odd feeling of being watched never left. As he lay in bed, trying to sleep, he kept hearing faint sounds, footsteps in the hallway, the rustling of curtains, the flicker of the fire in the hearth. He kept telling himself it was just the wind, the house settling, or his own tired mind playing tricks on him. But then, just as he was drifting off, the door to his room creaked open. Jack's eyes snapped open. His heart raced as he stared at the door, which was now slightly ajar. There was no one there. The hallway was empty, as still as it had been before. Confused, Jack got out of bed and closed the door, locking it behind him. But as he turned to go back to bed, he noticed something strange. A faint cold draft had filled the room. The temperature seemed to drop rapidly, and the fire in the hearth began to flicker. The portrait of the woman on the wall seemed to have changed. Her expression was no longer calm. Now she looked angry. The dark eyes that had once seemed to watch him were now filled with something else. Something dark and menacing. Jack felt a chill crawl up his spine. He quickly turned away, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread in his chest. He climbed back into bed, pulled the covers tight around himself, and closed his eyes, hoping the night would pass without any more strange occurrences. But it didn't. Around 3 a.m., Jack was jolted awake by a loud bang coming from the hallway. His heart pounded as he sat up in bed, straining to hear. The sound came again. This time, it was followed by a woman's voice. The voice was low and soft, almost a whisper, but it carried an unmistakable sense of urgency. "Help me," the voice said. "Please, help me." Jack's breath caught in his throat. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't tell if the voice was real or if it was just a figment of his imagination. His instinct was to stay in bed, to pretend it wasn't happening. But something in that voice made him get up. He opened the door cautiously and stepped into the hallway. The air was thick and heavy, like the house was holding its breath. Silence was deafening. As he walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoed in the stillness. When he reached the end of the hall, he saw the door to the locked room was now wide open. The room was dark, and the only light came from the faint glow of the fireplace in the distance. Jack hesitated, but the voice called out again, louder this time. "Help me. Please." Without thinking, he stepped into the room. The room was empty, except for the portrait on the wall. The woman in the painting was no longer just a picture. She had stepped out of the frame. Standing there in front of him was a figure, a woman in a long dark dress, her face pale and gaunt. Her eyes were wide, empty, hollow, and she stared at Jack as though she were looking right through him. He froze, unable to move. The woman opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, a low, mournful wail filled the room, echoing in Jack's ears. It was a sound of pure despair, the kind of sound that made his blood run cold. The woman's hand reached out toward him, her fingers skeletal and thin. Jack stepped back, his heart hammering in his chest, but the woman continued to advance, her mouth opening wider and wider as if to consume him. In a blind panic, Jack turned and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind him. He didn't stop to look back, didn't stop to think. He bolted, down the stairs and out of the inn, into the cold night air. He didn't care where he was going, just that he needed to get away from Harrow House and whatever was haunting it. The next morning, Jack left Eddington without a second thought. He drove straight to the nearest airport, bought a ticket, and flew back home. He never spoke of what happened that night, not even to his closest friends. No one would believe him. How could they? He had always been the logical, rational one, the man who believed in facts. What happened at Harrow House couldn't be explained, but the memory of that woman, her hollow eyes and pleading voice, would stay with him forever. Jack never returned to Eddington, and he never went near another bed and breakfast again. But on quiet nights when the house is still and the wind whispers through the trees, he sometimes hears a voice, a soft, faint whisper in the dark. "Help me. Please." And it makes him wonder if what he saw that night was just the beginning of something much darker than he could ever understand.